So just to start us off, I just got the POs from the town. What did I tell you, Rob? Yesterday? Is that when we spoke?
Yes,
Yesterday?
yesterday.
Yesterday. So I haven't really done a lot of in-depth digging because I just got the POs, but I do have like a game plan. Number one, I went through the ERI, right? Which is what you guys had asked me to do.
Right.
I will say it's very factual. There's no like recommendations or anything, but it just kind of tells the story. And Ron, it may help us with like the new requirements in the land use element because there's a lot of like climate and like sustainability stuff in there. So we may be able to pull that for the land use stuff.
Okay, then what my recommendation would be is that we amend the conservation element of the master plan and we create like a subsection of it called environmental resource inventory. And then we just list the inventory, that's simple. If it's all factual and it's not making
it's very detailed. It's almost like it's what 300 some odd pages, but there's no recommendations or anything. It's just kind of like, this is the soils, this is the flood hazard, this is the climate control, this is sustainability. It's just
okay, cool.
As is. It's all information that you can get by yourself if you spent the time to look for it, but it's all accumulated in one place specifically for Howell. So we could just reference it, and I think that would be good.
Yeah, well,
this isn't the first one, Jen. I know. I think Delaware something.
Yeah, the DVRPC did one. Yes.
Yep. So yeah, I agree with Ron's recommendation. Let's just bring it back to the board and say let's amend the conservation and put it in there.
And we can do that as part of like this initiative with the land use element, correct?
Yeah. So you can pull whatever you want, out of that, or you can even cross-reference, so like if we can amend the conservation element, and then when it comes time to do the land use element, to the extent we're repeating something, you can say, see environmental resource inventory in the conservation element, or something like that.
All right, that's one off our checklist.
Check. So secondly, the circulation element, we literally just got the PO yesterday. So we're gonna mobilize and start that, as soon as possible. But like, I would say that's something that I don't know that we want to rush, because I do want to make sure that when we do it, we get like September counts, like when school's back full time in session versus just now. So that might take a little longer. The land use element, we can just plow through. So I know that Matt had looked like one of the things, I think the starting points that we should make, and Ron, you can correct me if you think it's different, is obviously the 2019 report that was done, correct? Mm-hmm. And so there are definitely some recommendations in there that probably are still valid, but the warehousing, we probably need to take a closer look at, given what's going on. What I've been told, and Rob, you're probably in more of the know than me, but it got tabled this past Tuesday. I don't think it's going to be acted on anytime soon. So that's something that we probably need to look at like ASAP, as opposed to like as where we think the warehousing is most appropriately located. And my recommendation is up and around 33.
And what a warehouse is versus
Correct,
what a fulfillment center is, and distribution.
Yes.
And Jen, what I would recommend also is that we do a re-examination report with it, because the way that the case law reads, it doesn't say that the expanded notice isn't required when you do a master plan amendment. It specifically says re-examination.
Right. I would do like a re-examination and then amendment to the land use element combined into one.
Correct.
Right? We don't have to do them separate, right? We can combine them.
Well, you could do them separate or combine. I mean, because really the re-examination is just like the 6 questions. Right. So we could do that very briefly. And then the master plan amendment is, just implementing the recommendations in the re-examination report.
So Jen, obviously I don't want to speak for the council, and just by watching the last meeting that this was on their agenda and hearing all the attorneys and mainly hearing notice issues and all that kind of stuff, it didn't sound like, they're looking to abolish warehousing in Howell Township. It was more or less, and I think a couple of the lawyers referred to like, an illegal moratorium.
Right.
So, I think you're right. I think, what we need to do is say, hey, let's not put it all in, and say SCD 1, 2, light, I think we really need to narrow down. Good
Well, right,
locations
I
for
don't think
these.
we should just wholesale say SCD because
Right.
there are definitely SCD zones, like think about where's on Vanderveer and other places in town where you're not gonna want like tractor trailers humping up and down those roads to get to, because the roads really can't accommodate it. And when we put warehousing in the SCD, it was more storage. It wasn't what warehousing is today, which I think goes to Ron's point on really, we need to very clearly define what we mean by warehousing, or we're allowing this part of warehousing, but not fulfillment center or whatever, because it really dictates how the building is designed, what kind of, loading docks you have. Do you have spaces to store like the trailers or whatever? So I think that we need to define it and then look at it very closely. I do think that the area up and around 33 is a good area because it's going to go straight out west to the turnpike. I will say, which I want you guys' feedback on, is I've heard also some recommendations to allow warehousing on Route 9 south of Lanes Mill Road to kind of accommodate the population to the south. And I'm not wholeheartedly opposed to it, but my concern is that do we want to put that on both sides of Route 9 or just the southbound side? And the reason I ask is something similar to Ron and I dealing with in Manalapan, where it's on kind of the wrong side of the road, which requires the trucks to drive like a mile to the east, turn around to go to the west, which became a problem. And if you're trying to kind of cater to the population to the south, putting it on Route 9 North, the only place that those trucks could legitimately turn around is Lanes Mill. They can't turn around at Alexander Road. They're not going to be able to turn around at Estelle Lane. So,
and that's a pretty awful intersection already.
Correct.
So if you add that traffic to that
Right.
particular intersection,
it's going to be disastrous.
Especially on the north side.
That's
So
an understatement.
yeah.
Right.
I
So that's
wouldn't
why
want to see them on the north side. I'm not even so sure on the south side, but I understand, listen, brick and mortar is changing,
Yeah.
so, and I also don't want to suggest that we're going to put something somewhere because we want to appease a neighboring town,
I understand that. So just why I wanted to bring it up, but it came up multiple times. So I have notes on it. And like, if that's something you guys are going to entertain, I would strongly encourage you to consider just the southbound side, because
I mean, I think an analysis would have to be done on what properties are available there. I mean, I know
we have an application in currently.
Well, but the problem with that is there may be many more properties that are available than you think, because as you're saying, brick and mortar is changing. So as a certain property may have difficulty getting tenants, they may be looking to say, hey, you know what, we're just going to convert to the warehouse.
Well,
No, I
like
agree.
the Athena Diner, like that place has been empty for a long time.
Right.
Right.
The
And
other
that's
thing,
on the
Jen,
northbound side.
is I think we need to discuss the difference between having a principal warehouse use
Yes.
and having a use that's accessory to a business, where the warehouse is just serving the business. It's not like a general, warehouse.
But right, accessory to the principal use.
Yeah.
Right. So for example, I don't think it's like current, but I think we did deal with something on Route 9 where it was like the furniture store, which was
Right.
a small retail store in the front, and then they had a warehouse in the back, which was the warehouse was like three times the size of the retail store, but it was still accessory regardless, because it was just storing the inventory
And storing the inventory of that particular use
Correct.
doesn't come with the same traffic generation or hours, that any other kind of warehouse has.
But yeah, so we probably need to so at a minimum, we're gonna have to like clarify the definitions for sure.
Right.
And so definitions, and what about, Ron, maybe a conditional use? I mean, one size doesn't fit all. So, you know, maybe we start
Well,
looking at some conditions.
You can do a condition, we'd have to take a look at, you know, the ability to satisfy the conditions. We could take a look at that. You could take a look at that. You could take a look at making FAR requirements.
Mhm.
You know, there's different ways to go about it.
But again, I always say, and I know everybody's busy, but this is time sensitive for Howell because
No, 100%.
how many
yeah.
applications are now coming into Howell for warehousing?
I think we have 7 pending currently.
7 pending.
7.
And I heard we're up in the realm of close to like a dozen or so.
Yeah,
Although a lot are before the zoning board.
yes.
Because
And
they're in
you're
places
right,
that we don't permit them at all.
correct.
Well, that's problematic in itself.
Yes, it is.
So I know that I think right now pending before the zoning board are at least 2. One is on 366 Greenville Ramtown Road. And the other is Werbler's property. That one is problematic. The other one is not as bad, but the Werbler property is pretty bad.
You know, Jen, I know you're there and you protect the town, but one of my concerns is that maybe, you know, the zoning board and
I fight as hard as I can, honestly.
I know them all, they're all good volunteers and people, but I think at some point there's a miscommunication maybe between the governing body and them, and maybe that's where the township attorney needs to get involved in and maybe put on the record some of the council's you know,
I agree.
sentiments.
I agree because I bring up stuff and I will say that Charlie Cunliffe from T&M, who's the board engineer, he's as zealous as I am in terms of like fighting. And then sometimes I feel like we're fighting them, which becomes problematic.
Yeah. All right. We'll through our liaison bring this to the council's attention, I'm sure.
Yeah. So what I wanted to also bring up is I was on a call, I guess it was last week, Ron, or the week before when I was on the call with like Earl. It had to be last week, I guess.
Yeah.
So I guess Earl Naval Base through the county is employing this study that's being done with all the towns that immediately abut the base. And they're trying to coordinate with the towns on the zoning along like their frontages. So I logged into the call, fine. And then it was like, we don't want high density housing, affordable housing, senior housing, like a senior housing community. That's not consistent with their vision. And then
So just before you go on,
Sure.
I am compelled to say something.
Yes.
That statement, and I'm sure it's inadvertent
Oh, it's
on
in
their
writing
part,
too, by the way.
it
not.
is patently discriminatory and unconstitutional. The economic status of a human being does not make them more or less appropriate to live near Earl. You're not better to live near Earl if you are rich. And then if you are poor, you're not better to live near Earl if you are young rather than old.
I'm with
So
you.
I patently
They
reject.
should have just said
know,
high
that
density
statement.
development. They should have just said high density housing. And
That's
left it at that.
correct. Yeah.
But then they went on to say conditionally compliant was commercial, retail, industrial. And I'm like, okay, so if housing is not consistent and commercial and industrial is conditionally consistent, what's consistent? And they said low density residential, like 4-acre zoning. And I was like,
and I mentioned to Jen, and she remembered, we lost a case,
yes,
many years ago when we
not
tried
that long
to do
ago.
that.
Yes.
Yeah. It was in the early 2000s. Vinny
Where we
Tantillo was a
rezoned, where the
Vinny
town
Tantillo,
rezoned
yeah.
like what, a good chunk from ARE2 to ARE6.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we're
Yep.
sued and we wound up losing.
Yeah.
But I was very clear and I said, well, we're going to have to come to a different meeting of the minds because it's not in Howell's best interest to zone the Route 33 corridor, State Highway 33 corridor, large lot residential. Like that's not in our best interest. So
I don't think it's going to impact Howell all that much because what borders on 33 and Earl, I mean, we already approved 2 senior developments.
Well, and that's why they're saying it, because they don't want more, which I don't think I don't
Well,
think that's gonna happen anyway.
Yeah, I don't think we
Well,
have that much more.
We
I
don't.
think we should go and look back at the history. They were a noticed party to
Multiple
all of
times.
those applications. They
And
didn't come out and object.
to Ron's
Not at all.
position, the one that Toll's building right now, we expressly made them reach out to Earl because we thought that Earl was gonna have an issue with like the setbacks and like what
Mhm.
was gonna happen. Remember when it was John Junko was handling that
Right.
case?
Yeah.
And they had no comment, no input.
I
We
remember.
were expecting them to input, like to interject, and they did not. So, you know, and then like I'm trying to be diplomatic, and then I'm being told, don't be super aggressive with them. We need them. I'm like, I don't know why we need them, because literally they have no jurisdictional input into our zoning, but
Well, I won't even ask you who said we need them from representing Howell, but
yeah, no, I got you. But
it is what
I
it
just-
is what it is. And
Right. So I did say on the record that I'm not supporting large lot residential along the state highway where Howell has like 90% of their town zone residential. And we're looking for economic development opportunities. And like we have multiple state highways, we're not going to zone 4-acre residential on a state highway. So they can forget that. And they're like, okay. So I don't really know where that's going to go, but I do know that. So initially I was being kind of led to believe that we could utilize this quote unquote military exclusion zone that Earl is requesting to help facilitate pushing warehousing in that area versus residential. But then where they're like, well, it's only conditionally compliant. So then I'm like, I'm not sure that's going to help us. So I think we should just do what we're going to do and not worry so much about that.
all right.
Okay, so I have a list. Okay, so just so you know, I was asked to have a meeting with Matt yesterday. I encouraged him to just have the meeting today with the subcommittee because it's about master planning, which you guys are in control of. So I met with him yesterday anyway, just keeping that in mind. So obviously the warehousing, which we're well aware of, but then he brought up buffering. And I like, listen, I can tell you that the buffer, like the 50-foot perimeter buffer on a lot of the applications that you see at the planning board, we see at the zoning board, the town really holds sacrosanct and is very clear that, you know, you really need to comply with that. I don't know what his concern was with the buffer. Do you guys have concerns over the, like, as it stands today?
None. I
Paul?
think more than ever, you know, the way things are going in this world, we need space between each other and buffers, and buffers
Yeah.
make good neighbors.
Yeah.
Right, so I just wanted to throw that out there. I didn't really disagree with that, but I wanted to make sure. Then he brought up outdoor dining and that I guess the town is looking to like have the permits that they've issued to the restaurants in town expire in September. Have you heard this?
I heard that through Murphy's executive order, right?
Right, but
I think
it's really up to you guys because you guys have allowed it. Like, are you guys looking in
Well,
town?
no, it was allowed pursuant to the executive order. So they're intertwined with each other. So, and it wasn't, you know, very few towns, and they did it correctly, didn't do it through the land use process because it was an emergency order from the governor. So it's not like the zoning permits it once the emergency goes away.
Correct.
So if we want to keep it, you know, we need to take it and we need to incorporate it into the zoning ordinance and, you know, put some standards into it. You know, a lot of this stuff was done through the health departments and stuff like that. So we gotta shift it over if we want to keep it.
Yeah. I like the idea. I mean, you hear from restaurant owners that it was very successful for them. I know they passed the resolution to give the community development director, I guess, more leadway on outdoor entertainment. They just passed this Tuesday. That's another thing that we want to probably incorporate in our land use, set some boundaries for outdoor.
Yeah, because I think after this
Entertainment
past
music.
summer, that's gonna be a lot of these places. I think it's gonna be something that they all incorporate going forward.
Well, we have an
It's super
application now.
successful, and
Yeah.
again,
The cabin.
Oh, yeah.
cabin.
And they're going about it the right way. They're making an actual
Mhm.
formal application.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Right.
And it's not new to the town. I mean, they've done this for years. The cabin and others have done this for years. I just think now, because of COVID, it brought it to light that more people are doing
Right.
it, and we just need
And
to
if
have
we
some
have the,
guidelines.
yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, if we have the ability to set some sort of, boundaries and guidance, it's only gonna make the process, I guess, easier and more, consistent across the board.
So Jen, what would the council have to do to get that rolling? Give you the
So,
authorization
we
to
would
do
have to
environment?
look at some zoning, right? Right, Ron, which would allow for
Yeah.
outdoor dining.
What
Yeah.
I would do is, you would make it, you say it's, well, with the outdoor entertainment, we would just make it accessory, explicitly state that it's an accessory use, but, place some standards on it. You got to
Right.
incorporate that into, the parking and lighting, so that it's not like, lighting up the entire neighborhood.
Right.
And, just, I would put a reminder in there that they're subject to the noise, requirements. It's not a zoning issue, but that they're subject to noise. And then, you have to look at, what you want as a setback from neighboring properties and, things like that.
The resolution also limited it to Friday, Saturday, and Sunday with timeframes, I think until 10 p.m. So, Jen, I'm going to recommend that, to the council that they, Drew, however, the manager, whatever, get you to look at that and come up with some recommendations.
Okay. Right, because I mean, I do think that like so a bunch of the restaurants, like let's just say the Ivy League, for example, had a tent out back that they got with like their emergency permit, whatever. And like apparently that's going to expire at some point. So do they come in for like a minor site plan, or is this going to be a permit that's issued separately?
I would recommend that you make it a site plan, because
Like a minor site plan?
it depends. I mean, I think you could make it a minor site plan, but you have to define what it is. And, there may be some proposals that are much larger in scope than other proposals. So, if we want to say like X amount of seats, X amount of square feet, we could do that, but I wouldn't just blanket say it's all minor.
Yeah.
And
I will say,
also
like,
you may
so-
want to put in that it can be a minor if there's no variances or design waivers involved. If there are, it's not, different. I would just put some boundaries, on it.
So I know that Tinton Falls just went through this outdoor dining thing, and I think it was like right before COVID hit, but still they put in these parameters, and that ordinance stipulates that if the restaurant is part of a larger shopping center, outdoor dining doesn't require additional parking spaces, versus if it's a standalone restaurant, on its own. But I can send that around. You can take a look at it and let me know what you think.
Yeah.
But
Well,
that's
the other
kind of-
thing is, some of the restaurants, through the emergency, use their parking area for the outdoor dining. So, if they want to keep it, there was sort of a, no, because it wasn't done through zoning, there was no look towards whether the reduction in parking required
Yeah,
relief or not.
right, which in many cases it probably did.
Yeah.
But the reality is, now we're a year later, has it really negatively impacted the
Well,
parking?
but what I'm saying though is that you have to take that into account, so that I think part of it is you may want to look at the overall parking requirements to see if they should be lessened somewhat in order to accommodate the outdoor dining without the need for relief.
Right. So I think too, that following along that line, I think we need to look at parking. So right now we have like shopping center parking, and like when I look at shopping centers, I'm thinking of like Kohl's and Walmart and like that type of shopping center, versus like a retail center, which has parking. We may want to look at how that works, because I think, quite frankly, in many, many instances, we're overparked in many areas. And so, adding additional pavement may not be necessary. So we may need to just take a look at that overall. I'm not saying right, wrong, or indifferent, but we should just
Mhm.
look at it.
Yeah, definitely. After 15 years on the planning board, we've always heard we were a little aggressive and
Overparked.
zealous on our
But it's
parking.
not just you, it's
That's
every
it.
town. Like the parking standards are like, we're parking for like the apocalypse, and maybe one day out of the year it's necessary, but the balance of the year, 85% of the parking lot is empty. So
And shopping has changed. I mean,
Yes,
Amazon,
and
you know,
that's-
now
you're
everybody
correct.
gets boxes at their doors. It's not the same.
you're right.
So
You're
yeah,
100%
we
right.
definitely got to look at that.
All right, so the
Mhm.
other thing, and Rob, you and I talked about this yesterday. So apparently there's some move internally townwide to take another look at the sidewalk fund issue. And I know we talked about that and you were like, no. So I just want to
News
bring
to
it
me.
up. I just want to bring it up because I said I would bring it up, but I understand your position.
Well, that's
So-
that's a governing body decision anyway. I mean, they're going to ultimately make the decision, but you know, I don't know. I haven't heard anything. Paul, have you heard anything? No, you know, Ron, have you heard anything?
Yeah, they rarely talk to me about that stuff.
It's a governing
will
body
tell you-
decision.
But I will tell you that like it's not uncommon for towns to have like a sidewalk requirement, and then if you need relief from the sidewalk, you pay into the fund, whether you're putting it in or not. Right? I mean, Ron, you've seen that in other towns.
Yeah, some towns get into trouble though, because if you're gonna do that, you better make sure that you spend that money on sidewalks.
No, I
and not
agree
on
with
something
that
I was gonna
part.
else.
say, I'd rather just have the sidewalks, like just
You know, it's the same thing like the tree fund. I mean, you know, I like to see, you know, how many trees we're really planting from that fund. I know we buy a lot of
Exactly.
equipment, but
So it's just something to think about. I mean, obviously the governing body can do what they want, but I think that the request was to look at it and to see whether or not we wanted to put any kind of recommendation into the master plan. If the answer is no, the answer is no. That's fine. I just said I would bring it up. That's all.
Yeah.
Ron, we talked about this earlier and I thought it was pretty cut and dry about the generator issue.
Yeah, so my understanding of the generator issue is we have pre-existing non-conforming houses and they want to add on by putting generators, and it's a constitutional issue. If you have a pre-existing non-conforming, if you add on to it, it requires a variance. There's nothing that we can do as a municipality to alter that except to rezone to make them permitted uses. You know, you're not supposed to be able to, no matter what, you know, you're doing, whether, you know, it's beneficial or not, you're not supposed to be adding anything to a pre-existing non-conforming use. Under the law, it's assumed that use will actually go away. So that's the price you pay. Now, to the extent that you may want to make it easier for people, you know, we have some high application fees. We can drop the application fees. That's not the escrow fees, but like, you know, a site plan or whatever, we could just drop it down, you know, to a couple $100 or, you know, whatever. If you want to charge nothing, you could charge nothing, you know, and that way, you know, it's less expensive for the property owner. They can be, you know, streamlined so that they go through the process quicker. They'd be at the zoning board. But you can't say that you're a pre-existing non-conforming use. We will let you expand if you do this, but not that. It's just you can't expand under the law and the Constitution.
I think that's the recommendation. I mean, I can't imagine that there's so many cases of this happening in
I would
non-conforming
say
uses.
from what I've heard over the past like couple years, if I've heard 3, that's a lot.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, you know, I don't want to get henny penny because of 3, but I like the idea of if the town could help the residents save some money, you know, but we also have expenses that we got to cover. So again, that'll be a governing body decision.
The other thing that Matt had requested that we look at is the section in the ordinance that exempts an application from a site plan. And what, so what requires a site plan and what does not? I don't know that this has been an issue, but I put it to you guys.
I think we're
haven't
very,
seen it.
our ordinance is very liberal.
That's what I
So, I
think.
mean, I wouldn't make it 1 inch more liberal than it is.
And then the last item that he has on there is, so Ron, as you know, the MLUL allows daycare centers in all non-residential zones, right?
Mhm, mhm.
And that I guess we've seen over the course of the past year, a couple applications coming in for use variances for daycare centers in residential zones. Is daycare centers something that you guys want to allow more liberally, or are you fine with the way it is?
I mean, I honestly, I don't know enough about it. How many applications are coming through for daycare?
I mean,
really don't
I
know.
think we've seen as a zoning board, like 3 or 4 in the past year in residential zones.
Wow.
The issues with daycares though, is that, yeah, there's like activity early in the morning when parents are dropping off the kids, and then there's activity, but the activity on the afternoon hours is a little bit more spaced because it depends on when people get off from
Yeah,
work,
pickups,
etc. But like, you could go to a daycare center at like 11 o'clock in the morning and not one parking space would be full because
Right.
they're not there. So it's really not as intrusive as something else. But so the question becomes, and it's just something to think about now, you don't have to answer me today, is that maybe there are certain areas of town in residential zones that we could consider allowing them, or allowing them as a conditional use. Paul?
So you said you had what, about 3 applications this past?
3 or 4 in the past year.
And of those 3, how many had like all the neighbors coming out, or any neighbors coming out like against it?
I can't remember one.
Because like,
Any
Um,
denials?
when my
Any
kids were
denials?
younger,
No,
Like, when my
none
kids were
none have
younger-
been denied. No.
Yeah, well, it's
Right.
tough to deny them because they're inherently beneficial. So they are.
right? Like, because I was gonna say, so when my kids, the daycare they went to, it was an established daycare, but it was in a residential area, and like you said, between like 7 and 8 o'clock, it was a
It's-
little chaotic.
Right.
But then after that, it was,
Nothing.
so I mean, yeah.
I'm
I
not
don't
saying we
know.
need to change anything. I'm just saying maybe we can look at the zoning, and there may be some residential zones that are, proximate to like roadways that are a little bit higher traffic.
Well,
Or
how
make
about like
them
in our
conditional-
NC zone, our neighborhood commercial zone?
Well, we could make them conditional uses too, which says like, if you can demonstrate you're on X amount of road with X amount of parking, you're considered permitted. And if you're not, then if they don't meet the conditions, they wind up at the zoning board and they have to justify what they're doing.
Yeah.
Because you're not talking about somebody like that's, in a house and all of a sudden wants to, open up a daycare business, and, she ends up with 10, 15 kids, and
Well,
Like,
I think that's included, right, Ron?
There's some regulations for that, but what Jen's talking about is you will figure out, what the conditions are. But there are like home occupation, childcare statutes that are out there.
but those have like limitations anyway.
That's
So,
right. Yeah,
Like, yeah, my neighbor can't all of a sudden have 50 kids in their backyard. type
Right.
that's
of-
correct.
Right, okay, I guess so.
And they would still have to apply. They don't just get it.
Of
as a
course.
right. Like they'd have
Right,
to
right.
apply no matter what.
But again, I guess, anytime we're gonna make something and at least make it somewhat consistent, that's never a bad thing.
It's just something that I brought up for us to just think about. And I think that what we should do then is look at the zoning map and look at, so the MLUL allows it as of right in non-residential zones, right, Ron?
That's correct.
So that takes that off the table. So now we're looking at the residential zones. Maybe we look at it and maybe it's not okay in, the R3 or in Freewood Acres where the the properties are like on top of each other. But it may
Right.
be okay in an area that's like an area 4 and area 6, where the lots are like a lot larger, that can probably accommodate a lot, you know, maybe the increase or whatever. Because as you know, people drop their kids off between 7 and 8 o'clock in the morning, but staggered, but that's a little bit more condensed, but they're in and out in 10 minutes. And then
Right.
the pickup at the end of the day is like, listen, I was like the queen of the dump and run, man, because I didn't want to listen to the kids crying or anything like that. I was like, I barely stopped the car. I like almost shoved them out without like the car.
I'm glad
stopped.
those days are over for me.
Yeah, I know, but
On the other hand, I was always like, where's your cubby? You know, I'll try
not me, man. I'm like out. But you know, it's a minor disturbance in the morning for like a finite amount of time.
Right.
And then for the balance of the day, it's like nothing. But at the same time, it may not be appropriate, like in the middle of like an area that's, you know, has 0 non-residential uses. So we should just look at the map, and then you guys can decide whether we're just going to leave it the way it is in the non-residential zones, or maybe there are some areas in town that could accommodate something like that.
That makes sense.
Yeah. That's all I got. And I know I went over my 30-minute limit. I'm at 40 minutes. So that's all I got.
Jen, just because the circulation element, I really is the biggest thing on the spectrum, I should say.
Yes.
I just want to, because I wrote a couple of notes
Sure.
as I was getting onto this meeting. So I agree with you about the activity generators, and that, you know, we need to know more with the schools and commercial areas. But what I would like to see happen as soon as possible is that we start generating as much history, you know, information that we could get, as much data as possible. You know, crash histories in areas, you know, through the police department.
Well,
you know.
and that's going to be critically important, because, you know, we're not going to study every single road in town.
No,
Otherwise,
no.
it's going to cost you guys millions of dollars. So
Yeah.
we really need to narrow that down. I think in the scope, we said 10 roads. So
But what I would like to do is have a map and then mark up and identify as, you know, the priority.
I 100% would appreciate
Right.
that, because like I could pick out what I think, but you guys live there and you'd be better telling me what. But in the meantime,
Yeah, it has to be based on local knowledge for sure.
100%. What I
You
can
know.
do in the interim is I can reach out through, you know, Matt or Joe or Brian or whomever to the police department and get some like crash data. And
Well, the chief is also on the planning board, so
well,
he should,
yeah, and he's more than happy to help, I'm sure.
yeah.
Just to get the information, like if he could give us an idea of, I don't need every like fender bender, but if he can give me an idea of like these 15 or 20 roads are where we spend 85% of our resources.
Right.
And then we have to back out, you know, are they local roads or are they county roads? Because we don't really control the roads
County roads.
ourselves. And,
Right.
you know, like I don't want to spend my time analyzing a county road that the county's not going to even entertain widening or what have you, when we could spend it on 4 local roads, what we can make an assessment. So I'll reach out and see if I can get some crash data or like accident data or trends or whatever to kind of hone it. But like what I need from you guys is, you know, like I would say, if off the top of my head, I would say Oak Glen Road needs to be relooked at, because it's definitely different than it was 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, that's why I
West
think if we get a map, if we get a
Yes.
local road map, you know,
Yeah. we can-
you know,
West
we could,
Farm
like I said,
Road.
we could do mock-ups on them and get some input,
Right.
you know, from people. And the other thing I want to say with these reports is that I know, like, you know, they're very detailed. So we could look at, you know, whether it was a day crash, a night crash, what was the weather, what was the lighting conditions. These reports are very detailed. So I'm sure Chief Kudrick will be very,
Yeah, I'm sure he'll help us out. But like
That'll
we
be
can
help.
start there. But what I'm gonna need from you guys is like, I'll come up with what I think needs to be evaluated.
Yep.
But like you guys are also gonna have to interject and say, nah, that's not really a high priority road. Let's focus on this. Like, that's fine. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Right. So, and also like, I think in the circulation, and this is where we're coming, and even the planning board, we got to get suggestions of a vision and goals, and what's going to be the challenges, what's going to be the obstacles, because, you know, this wasn't done since 1997, Howell's
Right.
grown. And there's going to be a lot of maybe disagreements, I guess. So we just want to,
Concern,
we're going to do
I would
this in
say.
steps, right, Jen?
Concern is a better word, because you guys, like, I do think that there's, an overall sentiment that, the rural farming community tag that you've had for so long is maybe or maybe not kind of transitioning, and there are some that are adamantly opposed to the transition away from that, and then there are those that would like things to move in a different direction. And I do think that you can, because the town is so big, that there's an ability to accommodate both, but we have to be careful on how we do it.
I
You know what I mean?
definitely agree. Couldn't agree more. And Pauline Smith would say the same thing, God rest her
Right?
soul.
Yeah.
Then we're going to look at all our road classifications, because I know that's been brought up several times.
Yes.
They think the road classifications dictate zoning. I'm glad it was said again at the last meeting that
I
that's
mean,
not.
I said it
Oh,
multiple times, yes.
You were
So, our
crystal
arterial
clear.
roads, our collectors, our minor arterials, we'll look at that,
Well, and then the thing is that we need to look at that, and then we need to look at the conditional uses that require frontage on specific road classifications, and then decide perhaps those standards may need to be adjusted.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because I understand. So right now there are some conditional uses that require frontage on an arterial collector, but people probably don't realize that a lot of roads in town are considered a collector.
Mhm.
And so maybe we really need to relook at that.
I agree.
Okay.
Also, I'm sorry, Ron, just a couple of things. The jurisdictional roads, because I remember when I was on council, like Oak Glen is a county road, and we were looking to swap perhaps Oak Glen with Aldridge. So maybe we could also look at that, like the jurisdictional roads, and maybe there might be roads that might be better to swap with the county if they're interested, for several reasons. I mean, it was easier to snowplow Oak Glen because that's where our DPW is, and it's closer for the county DPW to perhaps the Aldridge, and it's a much busier road, and they kind of have more equipment to do, the road's better. So we should look at that. I assume we're going to look at speed limits, because that always comes up in.
Well, we're definitely going to identify what the speed limits of the roads are. And, we're going to, whatever the roads that we count, we're going to assess the volume versus the speed limit. But you guys do have the ability on the local roads the council does, right, Ron? On the local roads has the ability to regulate the speed.
Yes.
So
as well as traffic controls. I mean, we always hear this, a light should
I'm not
go
the best
here.
one to ask because I'm speeding no matter what.
And what about, and you brought it up earlier about the sidewalk fund. Do we want to look at our sidewalk inventory? Because one of the big things
Well,
to
yeah,
me is
sidewalks is definitely going to be evaluated in the circulation element 100%. And there are definitely roads in town that perhaps are totally inappropriate for sidewalk, but there are others that would benefit from sidewalk. And we always get, as you know, on the board, oh, it's a sidewalk to nowhere. It's a sidewalk to nowhere today. It's got to start somewhere at some point.
Yep.
So I
Angela
want you
Dalton's famous words.
right. But I do think we should think about the fund. I understand we spoke about this yesterday. I do understand your sentiment about it. And I'm not suggesting that you bang, the local resident or the minor subdivision. Maybe we exempt them out. But the developers, if a developer comes in on a road that maybe sidewalk is not appropriate, I don't know why we wouldn't take their money. You know what I mean? I'm not looking to bang the resident. The resident could be exempted out from a single family house or a minor subdivision or a minor site plan. But let's say you get a K-Haven and they're on a roadway, which may or may not require sidewalk, why wouldn't we take their money?
What about internal sidewalks? Would they wouldn't be exempt from the development? Does
I
that
don't think so,
exclude?
right? 'Cause that's
Well, the
regulated
the
by RSIS.
RSIS would require it.
Right.
Right.
We're really talking about the sidewalk on the public right of way outside the development.
I understand.
Yeah.
Again, I just don't want to see the small mom pop,
Right.
you know, that come in for a minor and we tell them you don't need the sidewalk, but yet you got to pay. That's
Right,
just
so
troubling
we
for
could
me.
think about like, what do you think, Ron, about like re-implementing the sidewalk fund, but then like exempting out minor subdivisions and minor site plans?
I would just do the minor subdivisions.
Okay, I agree.
So that's a recommendation we could bring to the council.
And
Yeah.
it would not, and it also would not apply to like a single family homeowner that goes to the zoning board that doesn't have a quote unquote site plan, but they're there because they're there for a variance. You
Okay.
know what I mean? It's a single family house, otherwise it'd be before the planning board.
Mhm.
And last, Jen, is bicycling, you know, pedestrian movement,
Yeah.
specifically bicycling. I don't know why I always got pushback from administration, my days on the council, you know, but I've heard so
I
many
will tell you,
stories.
I don't know specifically Monmouth County, but I can tell you Ocean County, like they will allow bike lanes and like the shared roadway, but they don't love it. So
And that's what I've always heard here, you know.
they don't love it. It's a humongous liability, especially because the widths of the roads, and then
Yeah.
again, I'm talking about Ocean County, but the widths of the roads do not allow for like the bike path with some kind of separation, you know what I mean?
Right.
Whether it's
Them-
like whatever. So it's really just striping in the right of
Just
way.
marking. Yeah.
And they don't love it because if they allow the bike paths on their roadways and somebody gets hit by a car, they're responsible. So they're not enthralled with that. So we probably need to have a conversation with Monmouth County about their sentiment, because I haven't done this in Monmouth County. I've done it mostly in Ocean County. So, you know, they may say, we need a minimum right of way of X before we'll even entertain a bike lane. And we need to know what their thoughts are, because you have a tremendous amount of county roads through the town, a lot more than other towns. So understanding what their requirements are is going to be helpful before we make recommendations on where we want to see bike lanes.
I agree. Would that go through you or is that got to go through?
No,
Matt?
I can reach out. It's fine.
Yeah. All right. That's all I have. Paul, you got anything on this?
You hit it all.
I don't know if I hit everything, but I just
think
wanted
we
to get that
covered
on the
lots.
record.
You got
And by
enough.
the way, we're almost at an hour, which is like 22 minutes beyond.
Motion to adjourn. I didn't even eat yet.
So I think we're good and we're going to continue to move forward. I'll keep you guys abreast of what's going on. And, you know, I think we had like, you know, I think there's a lot of good information that I've gotten and I'm going to start moving forward.
Excellent.
I would
Sounds
say
good.
though that guys, the land use element amendment for, okay, so what I've been told by the administration is push the land use amendment forward quickly because of this warehouse issue. And the circulation element will follow because that's going to take a little bit more time.
And again, what I heard just through the grapevine is that the town was waiting on Mrs. Beam.
They're waiting on me, Ron.
So,
Like, seriously.
All right. And also just the conservation element, that could be done, you know,
I
quickly also.
can rip that
Yeah.
off quick. That's
Yeah.
not a problem. That's
Okay.
fine. Yeah.
so,
All right.
all right.
All right, guys.
Productive. Yeah,
Good night.
thank you.
All
Thanks.
right. I'll
See ya.
see you guys
All
later.
right, take care.
Bye.